pivot tables are extremely flexible and powerful tools inside of Excel. In fact, many times, you'll probably find a summary value or calculation inside of a pivot table that you'd like to use in a formula. In this movie, I will show you how to use pivot table values inside of a formula using the getPivotData function. I will use the formula sample file, which you can find in the Chapter 2 folder of your exercise files archive. So again, my goal is to create a formula that uses a value from a pivot table, and it's a value that I'll be able to use regardless of how I rearrange my pivot table. In this case, what I'd like to do is display the grand total of all customers that have been acquired. So my pivot table data shows customer acquisition figures by region and by quarter for the years 2012 and 2013. And in cell G1, I want to have a formula that displays the grand total. To do that, I start entering a formula the way that I would enter any formula, by typing an equal sign. And then all I need to do is click the cell that contains the value that I want to use. That cell is currently cell F15, so I'll click it, and you can see that when I do, Excel inserts a getPivotData function. It has two arguments in this case. The first one is customers, in quotes, and that is the name of the pivot table, then a comma, and then A3. And cell A3 refers to the cell at the top left corner of the pivot table as it's currently displayed. And you can see that cell A3 is outlined. So now all I need to do is press enter, and the value 15,355 appears in that cell as a result of the formula that I entered, which I'll display on the formula bar by clicking cell G1 again. One thing I should point out is that the getPivotData formula that I created relies on the value currently in cell F15, the grand total. Now I can rearrange the pivot table, for example, by removing quarter and putting it up in the field area. You can see that even though the grand total is now in a new cell, its value still appears in cell G1. I'll press Ctrl-Z to undo the change I made to the pivot table. But let me show you what happens if I were to hide grand totals for this pivot table. To do that, I would click the Design Contextual tab on the ribbon, and then click the Grand Totals button, and click Off for Rows and Columns. Doing so hides the grand total, so the cell that I was relying on for this formula no longer appears inside of the pivot table, so that means that the formula returns a reference error. In other words, it can't find the cell that contains the data to which the formula is referring. If I were to bring back the grand totals, then the value is redisplayed inside the pivot table, and the formula returns the value as expected. There's nothing special about the grand total of a pivot table. For example, if I wanted to display the 2012 quarter 2 value for the West region, all I would need to do is create a new formula referencing that cell. So clicking a cell G1, type equal, and then quarter 2 for 2012, click there, and you can see that I now have a much fuller reference. Again, have the name of the pivot table, the cell, and now we're referring to the year 2012, quarter 2, and the West region. So in other words, the getPivotData function has all of the arguments that it needs to identify the specific cell that you've clicked and are adding to your formula. And it's great that Excel does all that work for you, because it would be a pain to try to get everything in the proper order and get all of the references on your own. And just to complete the demonstration, when I press the Enter key, you see that the data for quarter 2 of 2012 for the West region appears in cell G1 as a result of the formula.